most important right now is to ask Clyde Romero to come on up. Clyde, as you know, is a man of many, many talents, and he's going to be speaking about Centcom. I've been looking forward to this. Clyde, take it away.
Most of you here, when you watch television, you hear our U.S. forces, our Centcom forces in the Middle East. And I'm going to give you a briefing on what Centcom is. But before Centcom came around, there was something called Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force. And this is near and dear to my heart because I was on the ground floor of RDJTF. And how RDJTF came about. And unfortunately, with some things in the military, you have to have a tragic beginning, and that's what happened with RDJTF. And you're about to hear a briefing. This patch is the patch that was given to us that were on the air staff, and I was a member of the air staff as a captain. I was surrounded by 04s and 05s, and I was a captain. I was thrusted into this position because my Air National Guard unit was tasked to be a member of RDJTF. So as a young captain, and you'll see a picture of me as a young captain, in some very high, powerful positions. And those of you who have sat through most of my briefings, I get a lot say, Clyde, how did you know about this? Well, you're going to get a chance to find out about how Clyde Romero knows about all that magic stuff about satellites and all that stuff, because I literally drank through a fire hose for about 12 years. Centcom. Although Centcom, Jim, can you dim the lights just a hair, please, Ed? Although okay, let's go back. Yeah, Centcom was activated on 1 January 1983. It grew out of an early unit known as Rapid Deployment Joint Task Force. The RDJTF was established on March of 1980. It was really subordinate to a much larger Readiness Command, U.S. REDCOM, which had been in MacDill Air Force Base since 1972. But what really kicked off RDJTF was Operation Eagle Claw. Now, what most people don't know about Eagle Claw, that was to try to rescue the hostages in Iran, when Iran took our hostages in the embassy under the recently departed Jimmy Carter administration. But on March 31st, President Carter took a bold move and he says, we're going to go get our guys. We're going to go rescue these people. So they sent an otter out to the desert to land out in the desert to find out if the desert could support C-130s and landing. And these guys went out there and they planted infrared strobes to make a runway because this was all going to be done at night. And it was a pretty bold idea. And this is what it looked like. They came off the carrier Nimitz with the helicopters, and the C-130s flew in out of Oman, and they landed at Desert 1. But what they didn't count was weather always has a vote. Weather always has a vote. For those of us who are pilots, we know about that. Weather always has a vote on how we do operations. And that's what a hubbub looks like. And so the helicopters that took off out of the Nimitz ran into this. And it was a very bad experience for them. There was some tragic mistakes made, and when one helicopter turned around and the other 5 made it, but then one helicopter had some mechanical difficulties. So that's what it looked like. They came out of Masara Island, the 130s, the Nimitz, the helicopters went to the area, Desert 1. But the problem was when they got there, one helicopter had a mechanical problem, and they needed at least 5 to get into what they wanted to do, so they only had 4. And so the mission commander at the time said, it's a knock-it-off. They made a call to President Carter over Secure, and they said, we don't have enough to do it, so they knocked it off. But this was all at night, and nobody had figured out that between when they kicked this off And when it was that there was a thin coat of sand that turned into like powder. So in the repositioning of, and I wish I had my laser pointer, and so I take a hit. My laser pointer failed on me this morning. I should always bring two. I should learn better. But I would point out that the one over here to the left, the one behind the EC-130 with fuel, he was the one that needed to reposition, all right, to where the other guy is over there. And so in the repositioning, it was at night this occurred. So the helicopter had picked up and, oh, thank you. The helicopter had picked up, and the guy that was leading the helicopter, when the sand came up, it hit him in the face, so he went back like this. Well, the helicopter pilot saw this, and he came forward, but he came forward into the C-130 that I showed you in the previous one. He came back into, he came into this he picked up and he came into this C-130 and caused the incident.
This is better than mine.
This is better than, okay, thank you.
Showing off.
All right. Okay, so that helicopter picked up because he needed fuel, and this one had fuel, and when he did that, the sand came up. The guy that was leading him, the ranger, he backed up because the sand got in his face. The helicopter took that as come forward. He came forward and he hit the C-130, and the rest was history. Real bad crash. This is what happened. It was pretty tragic, but we learned from it. The bodies were eventually returned. It was the beginning of RDJTF, believe it or not. That was the wreckage. And the big thing was, here's the after-action report. The after-action report basically said, excessive complex plan, poor operational planning, flawed communication structure, and lack of adequate pilot training and poor weather conditions. We fixed all that later on, but like I said, everything happens for a reason, and this happened, and this is what made RDJTF, Centcom, and what you're about to see, other platforms, where we are today. So the history, this is the history of November 79, the seizure of the embassy, President Carter, he established the RDJTF. Oh, and by the way, a lot of people don't realize President Carter was the one who gave the funding for stealth. Yes, the reason why we have stealth is because President Carter. And then a lot going on in 79, the invasion of Afghanistan. The Cold War is really hot right now. So now we have the RDJTF. The events of 1970 threatened the stability of the central region. U.S. interests were at risk. We needed to do something. And this is where this came out. That's the original patch. I have one of them. So the rapid deployment joint staff mission statement must deploy 8,000 miles, deter and engage an adversary who possesses at least a numerical advantage of 5 to 1. The logistic change is a tenth as long. It's a long way to go, a long way to fight. And I was one of the pilots involved, and you'll get a chance to see all the other platforms that were involved. But the bottom line is you had to travel anywhere from 500 to 1,000 miles one way to go do the mission and come back. And we practiced this. This is the AOR, the area of responsibility. It's a vast area. It's not friendly. There's little places to put airplanes down. And those of you who have ever been there in this area, in this AOR, can attest to that. This is the countries involved: Egypt, Sudan, Djibouti, Ethiopia. And we had to get a lot of people on board with this. This was the first time the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps, Air Force, we all worked together. Prior to this, we didn't play together very well. We were all on the same team, we all saluted the same flag, but we really didn't play very well together. And we were going to make everybody play together. Once again, like I said, we had to learn how to play together. And this was a long process because the Navy does things different, the Army does things different, the Navy does the things, everybody did things differently. But we had to get everybody on the same piece of paper because we had to go in as a combined force. And if you look back at it, that's why Desert Storm and Desert Shield worked so well. But that was 1990. Here we are in 1980, 10 years earlier. So we had 10 years to practice, and you're going to get a chance to see all the practicing we did. We had to get units assigned. These are the units that were assigned to RDJTF, the 9th, the 24th, the 82nd, the 101st, the Marines, carrier groups from the Navy. And trust me, when you walk into one of these meetings like I did at Shaw Air Force Base or at MacDill, and you're standing in front of a Navy admiral and say, I need you to do this, he's going to look at you with a jaw on the side. You need to do what? You want, and same thing with a Marine four-star general. I remember General Christ very well. He said, you're going to take care of my Marines and do what? Yeah, we need you to do this. Those generals are very tight with their troops and their equipment, but we had to get them on board. These were the platforms that we all had to start talking to. Pave Hawks, the Chinook, the Apaches. These were brand new platforms coming on in the Army, and the Army was just learning how to use them. Not only that, we had to talk to all the Air Force bases in CONUS. We couldn't use any PACAF assets, that's Pacific Air Force, and we couldn't use any USAF assets. This all had to be CONUS assets. So here are all the assets that the Air Force had to do. I had to talk to all these people because I was on the air staff. Langley, Cannon had F-111s, Holloman, F-15s. The F-4 was still in use at that time. It's no longer. The F-4Es down at Moody Air Force Base. Myrtle Beach had A-10s. Mountain Home had F-111s. The F-16 was just coming on board at Hill Air Force Base. Homestead, Seymour Johnson, England Air Force Base, Shaw Air Force Base, which is also headquarters of the 9th Air Force. That's where I hung my hat. We also had to talk to the guys at Tinker Air Force Base, AWAC, and that's where I became an ace, and you'll get a chance to see what AWACS did. You remember the briefing the guy gave you on AWAC? AWACS was just coming on board in 1976. It was basically a virgin program. The commander attack at that time was General Creech. If you've never met a guy, he's passed away right now. He's about this tall. He was the longest commander of Tactical Air Command, 7 years. He was nobody you wanted to meet if you didn't do your job. I saw him tell the guy, I want you out of my command in 24 hours. I saw that. I was at that briefing. So you had Tinker. Then you had all the special C-130s, the Compass Calls out of Davis-Monthan. This is the first time the Air Force was going to play with all the assets to include the satellites. Remember that briefing I gave you about satellites? We were going to start using satellites now to build our air immersion plan. Because we didn't want to have another thing like Eagle Claw. So F-111s, F-15 was just coming on board. A-10 was just coming on board. Older platforms like the B-52 G models that we used to use for Strategic Air Command to drop nuclear weapons, we had to tell the commander of SAC, we need 2 wings to learn how to drop conventional bombs. You should have been at that briefing. Yes, because all Strategic Air Command wanted to do was drop nukes. We had to tell them, no, man, guess what, Popeye? We need you to be able to drop Mark 82s. And the last time they dropped Mark 82s was when? I'll tell you when it was. Vietnam, that's right. And what was the operation? That's right. And you'll be getting a briefing on that because I'm going to give that one later on during the year. So we had B-52s that we had to take out of the nuclear strike package thing and start to drop conventional bombs. That was an interesting day. Then you had the C-130s that did work clandestine for years. And all of a sudden they had to come out and start working with Air Force people and said, well, you know, we usually don't tell everybody what we do. He said, well, you're going to start telling us what to do now. We used to call that behind the green door. The green door was the intelligence door. And all of a sudden that green door was going to be wide open. You're going to start telling us what you do, how you do it, and how long you can do it. Tankers. You need tankers everywhere you go. We used to say nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. Right. Nobody. And so we had to start getting, once again, what was tankers? Part of Strategic Air Command. We had to go to the SAC commander at Omaha and said, we need 3 wings of tankers. You should have been at that briefing. That was really rich, trust me. RF-4Cs, that's what I flew, reconnaissance, all right? We had to get 3 wings of reconnaissance airplanes. My wing, a wing out of Birmingham, and there was a wing on active duty out of Shaw. Once again, rivet joint. Remember that briefing I gave you on rivet joint? That was behind the green door. Nobody knew what rivet joint did, nobody. That was a mission that basically had to get signed off by the president to go somewhere. All of a sudden, we were integrating rivet joint into a tactical package. That was unheard of. It was like, you want to use one of these $2 billion airplanes? Yes. We're going to go to war, and we're going to go to war. We're going to go to war to win, and we're going to know what the enemy does before they even know what they do. And that's what rivet joint does. Rivet joint, along with those funny-looking C-130s, we used to call the C-130s with the towel racks on them. Those are the guys that listen, talk to rivet joint, and they talk to AWACS, and that's what that was the first time this was ever used. Once again, the F-16 was just coming on. And then we were also going to use some special ops stuff, and you'll see something about special ops in this briefing later on. AC-130 gunships were never used in this type of operation, but we're using them now. We had to go down to Eglin and say, we need to use a wing of your AC-130s. She said, you want to use my C-130s? He said, yeah, we want to use your C-130s. And so we had to go above his head and say, just do what these guys want you to do. A7 was still around. The Air National Guard had most of them, and so they got incorporated. Also, this was the first time that AWACS was actually going to have an on-scene presence in a war. The war was going to be fought from the air with an airborne platform, AWACS. It used to be fought with an AVVBA and a C-130. It's not going to be fought that way anymore. We're going to fight it with the AWACS. But what we found out was the Soviet Union knew that. And so they had dedicated an entire wing. And we found that out because there were AWACS in USAF, that's in Europe, that was dedicated to shoot down AWACS. So this is me. You can see a young captain. Boy, they don't look nothing like that anymore, right? Look at that. Right, and notice these are all the guys that I'm training. They're all lieutenants, and we're on AWACS. Yeah, I was an AWACS ace. Yeah, basically I sat in AWACS for 14 hours, and I ran the air war, and we practiced. And you'll get a chance to see what I did in the air war because I've got all the stuff. As a mission commander, we actually flew the airplane, and then as an AWACS ace, I had the air tasking order, and I ran the war as a captain. And then we had other majors and stuff like that. Most pilots just like to fly, and I love to fly, but you know what? You don't fly without the paperwork. And this is where the paperwork is. So what we found out is that the Soviets always wanted to shoot down an AWACS because they knew that's where the war plan was. And so we had to get a MiG-25 simulator that was a Mach 2.5 airplane. And the only Mach 2.5 airplane we have is what? The SR-71. So guess what? We pick up the phone, we called the Beale Air Force Base and said, we need you to play MiG-25. You want us to do what? He said, yeah, we want you to play MiG-25 and we want you to start attacking our AWACS and to see if we can defend against it. And so that took a big phone call. You should have seen that phone call. Yeah. So we made that phone call, and every time we practice, and you get a chance to see we practice, SR-71 came up and tried to attack our AWACS. We used to call it retrograde. And we always protected the AWACS with 4 F-15s. Now, the F-15 guys that flew that, they hated that mission because they were basically just cutting donut holes in the sky. However, it was a real important mission because the Soviets had MiG-25 squadrons that were out to kill. So we had SR-71s that take off out of Beale and would point right at the AWACS, and the MiG-20 and the F-15s, and they were having a big time at Mach 2. Yeah, they were having a big time trying to catch it and all that. And so we learned a lot about how to attack an airplane that's moving at Mach 2 plus. This was big money, big money. I forgot what the budget was for this, but somebody told me it was like $2 million a day. This is back in 1980 dollars. Also, so we had Marines. If you've never been around a Marine general, that's a different kettle of fish. All right, these guys are really tight about their assets and all that, but they were going to play, and so we had to deal with the Marines. Those are the units we had to deal with. The death rattlers is the ones that I remember the most. They just got their F-18s, excuse me. They were out of El Toro, I believe. Good bunch of guys, but they play hard. And if you saw in that previous slide, they had Marine Corps assets in there, and they were going to be in direct support as close air support for the Marine Corps assets. And they didn't want to relinquish a lot of control. They surely didn't want to talk to AWACS, but we told them, no, you got to talk to mother. You got to talk to mom. The Navy was the same way. The Navy had carrier groups, and remember I told you in an earlier slide, you had to travel anywhere from 500 to 1,000 miles to go for this war. So the boats would be on the East Coast, and the war, you'll get a chance to see, we would be flying at the UTTR. That's the Utah Tactical Training Ranges out just on the other side of Salt Lake City. So they had to fly that far. And the Navy guys were saying, are we going to have tanker support? Yeah, we'll get you tanker support. One of the funniest missions I ever saw was we had KC-10s and KC-135s. If you know anything about the way the Navy refuels, they refuel with that basket, right? Okay? But the Air Force doesn't. So I remember these tankers coming out of Minot Air Force Base to refuel the F-18s coming out of the East Coast. And all of a sudden, the F-18 guy calls the AWACS, my buddy, and he says, Clyde, there's no baskets on these tankers. And that was so the F-18s had to divert into an Air Force base, get fuel, and continue on. So what we learned is that when you're going to support the Navy, all the tankers have to have baskets. They have to have baskets. The KC-10 was the only platform that had had a basket and a probe and had a boom. But the KC-10s were hard to come by. And as usual in our great thinking, the first tankers that we decided to retire was what? The KC-10, right? Another brain move. Anyway, so what we had to learn how to use was the Navy assets, the F-14, the F-18, the A-6, the EA-6, the E-2. The E-2 is the Navy's version, in my opinion, of the carrier-borne AWACS, but they're very good over land. They're very good over land. And so we had to learn how to integrate all these assets, and so they could not only talk to CIC, that's Combat Information Center on the boat, but then they would have to talk to AWACS, because AWACS ran the war. AWACS ran the war. And we had to get them involved so that they would understand that. So these are the Navy platforms. That's the E-2, A-6, F-14, the S-3 Viking, and the F-18. Well, the S-3 was basically an anti-submarine warfare airplane, but what I learned about it, and because I was integrated, they said, Clyde, you're going to be Navy. I said, going to be what? They said, yeah, you're going to be Navy. So I went out to North Island. I went out to Whidbey Island. I learned about the Navy, the whole 9 yards. The S-3 had a radar on it that was designed, if you can believe this. to fly. The platform would fly 50 feet above the water, and it could pick up a periscope at 50 miles. Yes, that was the design spec of that radar. 50 miles to pick up a periscope out of the water. So I said, oh, I want some of that. Oh yeah, I want some of that. And you know where that came to play? In Desert Storm. If you remember, people don't realize Desert Storm was over 30 years ago. So if you remember during Desert Storm, the Iraqis would have the transporter erector launchers for the Scuds that were coming up, and it was hard to find. So the Navy says, so some guy in the Naval War College wrote a white paper and said, oh, we got a platform for that. And the S-3 was on its way out. We brought them in out of the desert, fired them up, and they were out there low-level flying, looking for Scud launchers, and they found them. So yeah, this shows you. But that's because we did some of that stuff early on, and we knew the capability. And so somebody said, hey, yeah, we can do that. We have a platform that was designed for that. The EA-6 and the EF-111, we call that the football. The Spark and then the EA-6. These were platforms that were made to go with strike packages, with the strikers into contested airspace and jam the radars and make it difficult for the bad guys to talk. And they were integral. You didn't go on a strike package without your own jamming capability, all right? Because you could carry a jamming pod on your fighter, but nothing beats having one of these boys with you. Let me tell you how powerful these guys are. One time we were doing an exercise off the coast of Eglin Air Force Base at around 8 o'clock at night, and we had some strike packages in the Gulf of Mexico. We were practicing attacking boats in the Gulf of Mexico, and we had training files and we had active duty files, and we had a brand new lieutenant in there, and he did decide to go with the war files, and he blanked out all the entire radar from Texas to Florida for air traffic control. No, and the call on guard was stop buzzer, stop buzzer. Where's my pilots at? Stop buzzer, stop buzzer. You know what that means, right? Turn that stuff off. And yeah, so they blanked out all the radar for about 30 seconds until this kid could, oh, wow, I made a mistake there, you know, with the little wafer switch, yeah. So the stuff is really powerful, and we used them in the Gulf War, and once again, the Gulf War was basically the acid test on how well we did, but it took us a long time to learn how to do this. And you'll see how we did it. So are you finding this interesting? Okay, I don't want to be boring, because if I'm boring, I can just go home. All right, so now you have an idea, that's step one. So there's something called total force concept, and that hit the Air National Guard and the Army Reserve units, Army National Guard, and the Air Force Reserve units, and the Air National Guard units said, you know what, we're tired of using old Korean War stuff. We're tired of using old tanks. The Army was tired of using the whatever tank that old tank was. The Army was tired of using all the old stuff from Korea and stuff like that. And so they went and said, we want all the modern stuff. So the active duty component said, okay, all right, no problem. You want Blackhawks? You want Apaches? You fighter guys want F-15s? You want F-4s? I mean, you want F-15s, F-16s? Here's the deal. The next time we go to war, you're coming with us. You're going to be integrated with us. We're going to be the Army guys. He said, we're going to carve out a whole brigade that's going to be reservists out of there. So the Apache units were part of the 82nd and the 101st. The F-4 units were part of the 9th Air Force. So that was the total force concept. And nobody thought anything about it in 1983. In 1983, 7 years later, guess what? Suit up, boys. We're about to go to war. Yep. But that was the deal, total force concept. So total force concept, 1973, the DoD began implementing the total force in 1973. National Guard started to receive more modern equipment, increased training requirements, the whole 9 yards. Yeah, if you're going to play with us, you're going to train like us. You're just no longer a weekend warrior and 2 weeks at summer camp in Savannah. No, that's over with. No big deal. When we do a reforger, how many people in the Guard and Reserve know what a reforger is? When you're going to do a reforger, you're coming with us. When we go to the sandbox, you're coming with us. You're going to learn how to play like the big guys. And so that's exactly what happened. And that was a big experience level for a lot of the Air National Guard units that were just used to having a good time cross-country and go and seeing their girlfriends and stuff like that. That was all over with. Forget about that. That's done. So these are the Air National Guard units, because I was a guardsman at the time. All right?
Guys were former active duty, most of them. So it was just a different
Yeah.
organization.
Okay. Enough of the C-130 guy. All right, so the 186 TAC Recon Group was me. Alabama, those were the guys out of Montgomery. These are Ohio guys, New Mexico guys, Bangor, Maine, out of Harrisburg. So the Air National Guard had a lot of assets, because remember, Total Force gave them these nice assets, and now you're going to have to play with us. Oh my God, we're going to have to really work? Yep, you get rest. You know, we go into the prom. Okay? So, how we did this was CENTAF. Don't ask me how I save all this stuff, but I did, because I was a mission commander and I taught the mission commanders course, but I happened to save all this stuff. So this is an actual briefing guide for, we used to have a 1-week war every 9 weeks. They used to call them quick forces. CENTAF, Shaw Air Force Base, this was, yeah, you see my name up there, right there. We outfoxed the bear. And every 9 weeks, we went to war. Every 9 weeks. We activated Air National Guard units, Army National Guard units. We got a hold of the Navy. And yeah, every 9 weeks, it was brutal. But you know what? It worked. Because when we went to war in Desert Storm, we were the pros from Dover. That was the Super Bowl. Now, not to say that it wasn't hard, but this is where we worked out all the kinks. And then every so often, we would have a big operation, Border Star 81, all right? And Border Star was a huge operation out on the West Coast, all right? And these are where we used all the assets. The Army deployed a whole division out to that big training area in California. Yeah. The Navy came in with the West Coast carriers. It was huge. It was a 2-week operation. And guess who didn't fly, right? Yeah, because I was an AWACS ace, so I was stuck in my AWACS, but I still saved that because I remember that. And then we had other operations, which you'll see. So other RDJTF operations for some of my Army component guys were these. Fort Bragg, Brave Shield, Fort Polk. Look at the dates, 1980. I remember Bright Star 81 when we deployed to Egypt. So we knew we were going to have to fight in the Middle East. So if we're going to fight there, let's practice deploying there. So we got the money under the Reagan administration, and they said, how much do you need? Here's a blank check, go do it. So we would go to Egypt. We went to Oman. I went to Oman there in 81, all right? Who knew 9 years later, this is where the big game would be going off? So, as you can see, this thing is moving along pretty quick. This is 1989. This is the only booklet that I saved, but you had to train people how to become mission commanders. Everybody, I hate to say this, but there's a lot of RLOs, real live officers, that are in charge of things, but they don't know how to become mission commanders. And what we had to do was teach you how to become a mission commander. All right? And I taught the mission commander's course because I learned the hard way. So it was myself and other majors and captains that were teaching lieutenant colonels how to become an airborne mission commander. Now, I was an ace, so I sat in the AWACS, but every so often I would be in a striker, and you'll see a picture of me in a striker where I actually went out and did the strikes with the F-15s and the F-111s, and you'll see some pictures like that. And that's what a mission commander did. A mission commander actually flew with what we call a guerrilla package. And when I say a guerrilla package, that means you had 4 F-15s, 8 A-7s, 8 F-4Gs, maybe about 15 or 16 F-4s to drop bombs. It was a huge package that we were going into an area to bomb them, and you'll get a chance to see what that looks like. So this is the mission commander's course, and I'm sorry it's so small, but this is what a package looked like. F-15s, F-111s, A-7s, RF-4s, F-16s, E-3s, RC-135, remember I said rivet joint, V-52s. This is what I had to teach. How do you talk to the V-52s? How do you talk to the F-15s? How do you talk to the F-18s? How do you talk to the Navy? So we can all talk on the same sheet of music. And it was difficult because a lot of these guys were very stovepiped, and we had to open their horizons and say, listen, this is the way we're going to go to war. We're going to go to war in these huge packages, 40, 50 airplanes, and everybody's got their hair on fire, all right? And so we want you to think together. And then we also had to talk to the CSAR, Combat Search Air Rescue. If a guy gets shot down, who's going to pick him up? How are they going to pick him up? Is the Navy going to pick him up? Is the Air Force going to pick him up? Is the Army going to pick him up? Have you ever talked Army? You have to learn how to talk Army, because Army talks different, right? They do talk different. They got artillery. You got to know about that, you know. So this is the mission commander's course. And the first couple of times people go to this, they say, and then when they go to those, remember I said we had one every 9 weeks, when they come back and they got their face all full of junk on, they said, I got to pay more attention. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. So, yeah, so this was it. Airborne Command Element, ACE Operations, Air Tasking Order, Mission Commander Ops Order. You had to know all this rote. It's not like a fighter cockpit that you have this big, no, you got this on your knee board. You better have it up here. Okay, and fighter pilots traditionally, I was one of them, can be very, very tweaky, all right? So then we have what they call an RDJTF red flag. And if you've never been to a red flag, it's out there in Las Vegas. It's a huge area, a couple of million acres. It's phenomenal because you can drop live. They've got real live simulators out there that will track you, and so you can't cheat. So in other words, if you're going against a Soviet weapon system like an SA-6 and say, I got him, they said, no, let me show you this video. You know, no, you did, he got you, all right? So this was the first time we took a whole RDJTF package, and we're going to go to red flag, and it was a 3-week operation. Red flag is usually 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We've got everybody involved, Navy, Marine Corps. We learned how to land the C-130s out in Texas Lake so they could arm and refuel the A-10s as a close air support package. We had Army guys practicing combat search air rescue. We would actually go into the briefing room and say, you, and you just got shot down. We're taking you in a Jeep. We're throwing you in the middle of the desert, and all you got is your radio. You need to get rescued or else you ain't eating lunch today, all right? And that type of thing. And that's what we did. That's exactly what we did. And we learned a tremendous lot about that, because this was the first time we actually put something together where we could drop live. And everybody can drop a practice bomb, but when you drop live, it's a totally different scenario. So this is what the ranges would look like. These were our targets at Nellis and the UTTR. And the guys would go out 2 months later and build plywood tanks and plywood stuff like that, and guys would actually try to bomb them and see how good they were, because they were going to be attacked, and you couldn't get away, you couldn't lie, because every airplane had an ACMI pod. That's an Air Combat Maneuvering Instrumentation pod, all right? And no matter what you did, the guys back at Nellis could say, oh, you missed that target, and you just got shot down. And so when you come back, you couldn't lie. There's no way. You couldn't lie. You know, there's no way. And then the range had televisions on it, so we could tell exactly where the bombs fell. Okay? And then this area right here is the target complex just on the outside of Utah. Okay? So this had aircraft, targets, rail yards, and all that, and radar sites. So everything we did at these is equivalent to what we were really going to do in 1990 when we went to Desert Storm, Desert Shield. But we didn't know that then. But we were practicing all the time. And once again, we had to, there's a saying in our business, you have to train like you fly, fly like you train. So airplanes were all supersonic, so we had an airspace guy that I knew very well, and I said, we need to give the fighter guys some places where they can go in subsonic and come out supersonic. Because when you're scared, you're coming out at the speed of heat, okay? And that's just the way, that's the real word, you know? And so we had to get supersonic areas, and we got them. You know, this was a big deal. And then these were areas right here where you had to stay away from at no-fly areas and stuff like that. That's the desert right there. So there was some airspace limitations, but overall, we had a carte blanche. Overall, we could do what we needed to do to get the mission done. And that was the most important part. Once again, so this is what it would look like on your knee board. This is where you had the RC-135s, the EC-130s, the orange AAR tracks, okay, no-fly areas, AWACS, that's where I would be hanging out at, Grape AR, the Sunny Moa. So you had this on your knee board, and everybody had this, so you knew where you had to be, where you had to stay away from. And then over here, this is once again where you could drop chaff and flares, because we loaded the airplanes with the actual war loads that we would go to war with, chaff and flare, the whole 9 yards. We had to stop getting away from practicing. We had to start getting into, this is what we're going to go to war with. This is how we need to do it. So once again, this is me on a tanker. I'm a mission commander. We did a lot of this, a lot of tanking. It was nothing for me to take off out of March Air Force Base. And remember, I said the legs had to be at least 500 to 1,000 miles before you get to the target. So you couldn't really do that in the United States. So the way we did it was I'd come out of March Air Force Base and fly to Houston. Yeah. And then from Houston, I'd fly to Utah to practice getting a 500 to 1,000 mile leg before I started dropping my bombs and taking my pictures. And so it was nothing for me to take on 15 to 20,000 pounds of fuel, all weather. And you'll get a chance to see what it looked like for me and my compatriots, because I'd take off out of one base, the F-15s would take off out of another base, the F-111s, the huge packages. And you'll get a chance to see 2 pictures of a package. This is me as a mission commander. And this is what a strike package would look like. Those are F-15s. That's me right there. And notice the great weather. Isn't that? Notice the great weather. Yeah. And you didn't cancel for weather. No. Because weather's going to play into it. Remember I talked about that? Weather always has a... Yeah, we didn't cancel for weather. And so the tanker guys were integral, because nobody kicks ass without tanker gas. Nobody. And once again, these are F-111s out of Cannon. That's me. I'm leading a package. I'm an airborne mission commander at this time. And it was real important to be able to lead other people, other fighters, into a contested area. And they had to believe that you did the briefing. All these briefings were done by telephone. This is way before video teleconferencing, way before the internet. You had to do this by phone. And so everybody had to know their job, know what type of weapons to load on their airplane, because they had to know the target. It was integral that you knew this, because the F-111s were really good about blowing up runways. So you had to know what a Durandal was, all right? You had to know what a Mark 82 was, a Mark 84. You had to know what these hey, where are we going? Are we going to knock out a runway? Yeah, okay, who's going to do this? I got F-111s out of Cannon. I got my F-4Gs, Wild Weasel guys that are come in with the package that are going to do some knock out the SAMs. And then I got my EF-111s coming out of Cannon as well. Okay, good enough. So, once again, RDJTF morphed into Centcom. And as it evolved in 1983, it turned into Centcom. And then things really started to happen. So you had here, the first time Centcom really did its job was the Grenada operation, all right? The Grenada, people don't remember that. That was under the Reagan administration when they went into Grenada. And to be honest with you, it was a debacle. It was a debacle. It's the first time we used SEALs, the first time we had used the 160th. The Navy was there, but once again, the biggest issue is that you had commanders changing every 3 to 5 years. There wasn't any people staying around for a long period of time. There wasn't any what we call tribal knowledge. So the Navy guys didn't really support the Army guys coming in. And so they got the job done, but they lost people, they lost helicopters. But that was bad, but we got that job done. But that was the first time Centcom really did their job, but they made some serious mistakes. All right, that's Urgent Fury once again. All right, part of that. Then you had Acid Gambit, the invasion of Panama, remember that? All right, that was another operation with Centcom where they had to go actually do their job. The 160th went in. That's when they used the AC-130 gunships. And they were lucky that they learned how to plan to use the AC-130 gunships, which were integral to that operation, okay? And that was very successful. There were some casualties. There were some things that were done wrong, but overall, they get an A on that one. Gulf War, 1990. That was the big parade. That's where we put all that knowledge that we learned from Urgent Fury, the Panama, all those quick forces and everything. We were going to learn how to really do this because this was a big deal. This was a coalition thing. We were leading the coalition. We had team players on board that believed the concept. And we were going to get it done. The Navy was there, the Marine Corps was there, the Army was there. This was the big parade. And it worked, right? We won that one. It was a no-brainer. We lost people, but it could have been a whole lot worse. So out of that, this is where the United States Special Operations Command morphed out of Centcom. And I'll read it to you. The United States Special Operations Command is a unified combat command charged with overseeing various special operations components, commands of the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, United States Armed Forces Command, Department of Defense, and it was the Unified Combat Command created by the Act of Congress. SOCOM, the big deal is just what I says here, clandestine, okay, another failure. All right, clandestine activity. That's what SOCOM really does. Very sneaky stuff at night. That's what they're really made to do, okay? They morphed out of Centcom because a lot of the stuff that we need to do needs to be done at night, and nobody needs to know about it. And so they do the other stuff, and there's a small 2-minute briefing that you'll see after this, and I think it's coming up here. Right here, it gets complicated. That's an understatement. Because once again, those are the people that are involved in all this. It comes down to cubic dollars, and people always want to make rank, so it gets complicated. Everybody wants to have their own piece of cake. And that's what this is. So now you have Army, Air Force involved in this. And you're going to see this small briefing. Let's see. Let's hope it works. Maybe, maybe not. Okay, my video didn't work. But the video basically would have talked about all the units that were involved with SOCOM. And this is where you have SEALs and Delta Force and the 160th and the U.S. Air Force Special Operation Command come from. So now you have Centcom, and then you have a branch out of Centcom that does all the really night crazy stuff. I call it the crazy stuff because it's not, the only time you hear about it is when something goes wrong or something goes really, really right. There's probably something happening right now with SOCOM. Something happening right now. You'll get a chance to see some SOCOM operations that are in the white world, but most of the SOCOM operations are in the black world. So under SOCOM, you have Joint Special Operations Command. All right, and it's a component of this is charged to study special operations requirements, techniques to ensure interoperability. Big word, but it really counts. To ensure equipment standardization, plan, conduct special operations, exercise, training, and developing joint special operations tactics. So that's where you get the black helicopters from. That's where you get all those special platforms, and you'll get a chance to see some of them. That's where you get the Osprey from. That's where you get the improved AC-130 gunship. This one is really interesting because, as you know, I'm a retired American Airlines pilot. I got a chance to see this airplane one time, and it's all white, and it's air refuelable. I'm saying, who owns this thing? Where's this thing coming from? And so I make a couple of phone calls, and this is what this airplane does. This airplane basically is a 757. It's air refuelable, and it's kind of like in the white world, but it really isn't. It's up there at the Joint Base in McGuire, all right? And it basically flies all our special operations people into basically civilian airports, and nobody asks us a damn thing about it because it's got end numbers that they put on with decals, you know. And if you saw this thing at Hartsfield, you wouldn't think anything about it. You just think, oh yeah, you know, what's that white 7? Oh, Delta didn't paint that one today. That's all. Yeah, that's all. So now you have, these are the real special operations guys. That's a C-12, a U-28, basically it's a Platus airplane. Very, very unique platform. It can land in and out of like 1,000 feet. It's a very capable platform. And then you have this one, the Caravan, the Wolfhound. These are all airplanes that are down there at Eglin at the Special Operations Center. And naturally, if you're a pilot, you just come out of flight school. Do you want one of these? No, you want your F-15, your F-16. But they give these brand new lieutenants and all that. And it's one heck of a way to learn how to fly an airplane in some very, very crazy places. Very crazy. And you never hear about these platforms. You won't see these platforms at an air show. No, you won't see them.
Well, that one has Iraqi Air Force on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wait a minute. So now we get into the helicopters, the special operations, the 160th. So the 160th is the Army's version of the Air Force of special operations. These are the guys that are under JSOC, and these are the ones that went to get bin Laden and kill him. And I learned when I went down to Fort Novosel to speak, I asked the general, can I say the word kill or can I just say the word eliminate? And he said, no, I want you to use the word kill. So I'm using the word kill. Because, you know, everything's politically correct right now, so you can't say kill, you have to say stop. I stopped him, I didn't kill him. No, we kill people. So that's what they did. And so the 160th was an offshoot of what happened back in 1979 when they went into the desert. Remember, it turned out to be a debacle because nobody practiced any of that stuff. You know, nobody practiced night vision goggles and landing in sand and all that. That's what these guys do. They do it. Nobody else does it better than the 160th. Now, they have a pretty heavy incident rate, but, you know, when you got to get somebody at night in bad weather, this is the people you send, okay? And I didn't know this until I went to my Cobra reunion at Hunter Army Airfield. And we were there at the Cobra reunion at Hunter, and there's the 160th. I'm saying, I didn't know they were there. And so they knew I was a Vietnam vet. They took me to the hangar, and I got a chance to see some stuff. And it was pretty interesting. And what's interesting about the 160th at Hunter and the same thing at the 160th at Joint Base Lewis McChord on the West Coast. So they have one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast in case something happens, these guys can deploy right away. Guess what's right there with the 160th? It's a C-17. There's a C-17 right there, right there. So if the horn picks up and they say, we need you to go, they take the helicopters, they fold them up, and they put them in that C-17, boom, and they're on their way. And I didn't realize, because I said, what's that C-17? Then it said, never mind, I figured it out. Yeah, so the Air Force is in, the Air Force C-17 guys are right there with the 160th, and they go right away. And they practice this all the time at night, loading up, getting the hell out of Dodge, and going wherever they want to go. So if you've never seen a 160th airplane up close, aircraft platform, the Little Bird M86, that's what I flew in Vietnam. That platform is still around. This is the improved version. It's still only got one motor. And then you have the Chinook, which is the most powerful helicopter the Army has right now. And that one's air refuelable. And then you have the AH-6, which is their gunship platform for close-in gunship work. Then you have the DAP, which is the direct air penetrator, which is when things get really ugly, they send that thing in there. They don't use the Apache, they use a UH-60. And then you have the MH-60, which is air refuelable as well. So most of their platforms are air refuelable. So now we're going to go to the list of known operations. These are known operations. You can see them. These are the ones that I was able to find out about. But I guarantee you they're out there doing something right now in Syria, because Syria has fallen and turned into something else. And we probably have black operators right there, right now, working with Rangers or working with Delta Force guys right now. I was just about positive. Additional special operations units. Once again, everybody wants a piece of the pie. So now you have reserve units that have learned how to do special operations, and they augment the other units. And so these are the units that are involved in special operations. So that brings us to this, GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism. It's a military campaign that began right after 9/11 terrorist attacks. In terms of refers to military action as well as diplomatic and financial efforts to stop terrorism. The GWAT includes the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, as well as other actions. These are other Centcom operations that were involved, reflagging tankers, embargoes, liberation of Kuwait, famine release, Somalia, supporting the United Nations. The bottom line is Centcom is everywhere. It's predominantly in the Southwest Asia, but there's no telling really where Centcom, the Centcom that I know of is in the white world, but if you saw what I said about the Joint Special Operations guys, those guys work in the clandestine world. They're the ones who rescue people that we don't even know they're in trouble. And the only time we know about it when we turn on the evening news, we say, well, these people were rescued by U.S. forces. And that's all we hear. That's all we know. In the 2 decades of fighting terrorism, 660 members, probably more, this is an older slide, of the Special Operations Committee have been killed, and a further 27 and 38 were wounded. It's a dangerous business, very dangerous business. I know of 2 Osprey crashes, one of an Air Force and one of both of them were Air Force Special Operations Ospreys that crashed in the previous administration. Well, actually, one of them crashed during the Clinton administration, and they had to blow the aircraft in place because they couldn't get it out, and another one, Air Force One, crashed in Afghanistan, and that killed the entire crew. And the only people that really know what happens is the people in that Special Operations community. You'll never hear about it anywhere else. And the only reason why I know about it is that a good buddy of mine said, you heard about that Osprey crash? He said, no. And he told me about it. I said, okay. So we sleep good at night. We know we have television. We eat well. We travel all over. But there are people out there defending what we love out there right now, doing it in the middle of the night, making sure we have all the things we want here in the United States. And we have to always remember that. And then I'll just, if I can remember. Oh, yeah. So I have a challenge coin. Most of you have challenge coins. I got this challenge coin. It's a Special Operations challenge coin, and I can't remember how I got it because I was never a member of JSOC. I never was. But I was a member of the RDHAF, and I was a member of Centcom. But I just remember something coming in the mail, and it had my name on it, and the note said, thanks, Clyde. Thanks for all you do. And I said, okay. And I couldn't tell you how I got this because it wasn't like somebody palmed me. You know how they palm you and they give you one? That didn't happen. That did not happen. All I know is I got this in the mail. I don't know how they found out where I live. I was never a part of JSOC, but somebody knew that I was involved way back when as a ground school kid, as a kindergarten guy in RDJTF and Centcom and all that, and I got one. And this is one of my most cherished challenge coins. So all that being said, Ed, you can turn up the lights a little bit now, please. I think they're tired of hearing me talk. I'll take some questions. Don't ask any hard ones, please. And if you drag me into the classified world, here's what I'm going to say. You've asked a question outside the scope of this briefing. Whose is this? This is yours, Greg? Thank you. You need new batteries, just like me. Okay. Any questions? Just make them easy. I'm old. Go with the...
Just a quick question. You mentioned a wing. How big is it? A whole wing was involved.
A wing in the Air Force. All right, so a wing in a fighter command, in a fighter unit, would be four squadrons of 18 airplanes, sometimes as many as 24 airplanes. So anywhere from 18 to 24, what they call UAE, I can't remember what it just means that you have 24 airplanes, sometimes as many as 18 to 24 airplanes. It just depends. But
What's
so,
the rank of a wing commander?
Huh?
What is the rank of a wing commander?
What is the
What is the
rank?
what? Rank.
What is the rank of a
oh,
wing
the rank
commander?
of a wing commander, it changed. It used to be a colonel, and then it went to a general for a while, and then we had way too many generals, so now it's back to a colonel.
So it's equivalent to an army brigade.
Yeah, right. So in the Army was brigade and division, and what I learned about the Army, they have corps commanders, and those are 3 stars and 4 stars, and when you have to deal with those people, that's a whole religious experience, because they talk in, we need 30,000 men here. I said, I can't do 30,000 hours, let alone 30,000 men. And the big thing I learned about working with the Army and all that is logistics. Logistics. Here's what I learned about the Marine Corps. A Marine, I don't know, they call it a division. Where's my Marine general at? Where's he at? He's here. I know he's here. Anyway, when the Marines land on a beach, whatever they have with them is good for 90 days. They don't need anybody around them for 90 days. I learned that. I said, wow, that's impressive. At 91 days, come help me. But for the first 89 days, they're the pros from Dover, you know? And it's the same thing with the Navy. The Navy, I learned about how many airplanes they can take off from a carrier and recover at a carrier and load up bombs and leave again, and where they need their tankers at. And because when you do blue water ops, where's my Navy pilots? Any Navy pilots? All right, so blue water ops means when you're in a carrier and you're out in blue water ops, there's no land-based divert. In other words, you have to come back to that carrier or you go swimming, all right? And so what I learned about that is that, yeah, you can have a carrier out in blue water ops, all right, but you better give me tanker support, because I can only move that carrier so fast to the land area, and chances are, if I'm moving it close to land, I got to be careful because there's land-based missiles that may hit my carrier, and you haven't lived until you talk to an admiral of a carrier-based group, because he's real protective about all his stuff. And I learned about Aegis cruisers and all that stuff. It's stuff that I learned. Here's what I learned also. P3s, remember the P3? It carried nuclear depth charges. I didn't know that until I got on one. I said, we call them big fish killers. Yes. So I learned a lot about this stuff, but it's still out there, and it's getting more and more complicated every day. We bought anti-jam radios. Now we used to have a problem with radios being jammed, but no problem anymore. We can talk anytime we want. Any more questions? Well, I hope you enjoyed my briefing, and thank you very much for listening. You can kill my mic, Ed.